Hello and welcome to the Tonearm, where we connect you with the people and ideas moving culture forward. I'm your host, Lawrence Peryer. Today we're putting the Tonearm's needle on Stephen Emmer, a Dutch composer and musician based in Amsterdam. Stephen came up in the late 70s post-punk underground, and his band Minny Pops was the first international act signed to Factory Records. He's a curious genre explorer who's worked with Lou Reed, Chaka Khan, Tony Visconti, Trevor Horn, and Flood, amongst many others. Stephen's latest album, Asymmetrical Dot, is a chamber work rooted in his Dutch-Indonesian heritage, built around sustained tones, wordless vocals, vibraphone, and strings. The record came out of a year when his mother died and his first grandson was born, and the contrasting themes of grief and arrival appear throughout the work. We cover the album, Stephen's hearing loss, and why he walked away from commercial work to make the most personal music of his career. As a reminder, we're only here because of your support. You can support us by listening, by sharing our work, and financially at the Support Us link on thetonearm.com. Thank you so much. And now, Stephen Emmer. Could you talk to me a little bit about the relationship between purely commercial production work and your autonomous sort of artistic side? I would imagine it's not quite as stark or binary as I present it, but
Yeah.
one is workmanlike, right? And I'm curious, do you pick up methods and ways of working that benefit you as an artist?
Mm.
And are there things about your more pure play artistic life that help you on your commercial side? Like what's the dynamic between the two? Or are you completely different people?
No, not at all. In fact, when I started doing the production work, this is in the 80s, there was total freedom there with the broadcasters. They said, well, you're the guy who is supposed to have knowledge of music, so do your stuff. As the years went by, suddenly you didn't have to deal with the creative producers anymore of the broadcasters, but you had to deal with the marketeers and the managers. They said, well, we have a preference for the Rolling Stones, says Stephen. How about doing a new theme tune like Start Me Up? And that's where I started to think, it's not as adventurous anymore as it used to be. To answer your first question, I see the Bowie poster there. I had the privilege of working with his producer, Tony Visconti.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
And allow me to quote him in answering your first question here. He said something which I never thought of myself. He said, Stephen knows how to avoid the clichés best because he's learned all of them. And that's what I did. Production music is often with a lot of clichés in it. A news theme, horns, or current day with the Morse code synth thing like the BBC News. And so they have all kinds of clichés. And as soon as that's successful, I guess like in the hit rate of pop music, of mainstream pop, that's where the decision makers say, we want more of the same. And now I got rebellious against that. And I said, no more of the same. The arch enemy of artistry. So that's where I started to become independent.
It's funny that you use that example because in another part of my life recently, I had an interaction with a pretty established visual designer.
Sure.
You know, when you're the client, you feel a certain, you should have some opinion that's valued. But when you work with a creative person who is successful and confident about their aesthetic and point of view, I can laugh about it because it doesn't really bother me. I love creative people. But to be told as the person cutting the check that your ideas are stupid,
Yeah.
it's always quite the dynamic.
It is, really is. And as from today onwards, as I've just explained, I can look back and think, it's not only that discomfort, especially the last couple of years, being involved in the production music, but it's also, here it comes, a huge gratitude because in the early days, it was like a laboratory of music adventures. Nowadays, it's not like that. In a way, there's an equivalent with the mainstream pop. So when you hear current pop music, it is quite different from Sgt. Pepper and all of that. It's a bit of an old man's point of view here now, but I mean, the music was a bit more adventurous at the time, here and there. The same applied to making music for clients. Clients, they move with the time. They move ahead with the time. And sign of the times now is to be a bit more cautious, a bit more bland. playing it safe. There's a lot at stake, stakeholders. What I did is learn an awful lot, which I would never have learned being an autonomous artist from day one. Certainly not musically. I know for 4 years I was music director for Holiday on Ice International. And I have to say, the skating has to take place in the right 4/4 beat, in the 115 BPM area, with a certain intro and a certain outro and a certain break. And all of that are musical clichés, so to speak, or is very conventional type of music making. And you have to learn it to lose it later on. That's great. I recently saw a painting by Matisse, the painter from France, who is known to us all as more or less impressionist abstract. But I saw some anatomic studies of humans he painted in his early days, which told me the guy was in the know about what to do to create, and then tried to get rid of it to find new ways on his own terms. And that's exactly what I've been experiencing, I guess.
That's very resonant when you think about, whether it's improvising musicians who have to be so proficient in technique and then they set the technique aside and transcend it, or filmmakers who go to film school to learn about lenses and color and then go do avant-garde angles and,
Indeed.
cutting and editing.
Indeed.
It's basically learn your tools and learn the fundamentals before you go try to be some kind of provocateur or avant-gardist.
Yeah, rejection comes after insight.
And mastery.
Yeah.
One other thing before I move on from this, because it's so fascinating. I speak with so many artists who have what I sort of would call a portfolio career, especially in this day and age, as the industry has changed. People are there's so many different aspects of ways to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
When you gave your Holiday on Ice example, something about that strikes me is, if you were inclined to, you could go to one of these performances and see your work moving an arena full of people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not trivial.
No, it's not, especially when it's international traveling.
Yeah.
So I had one opportunity that the show would also be performed in South Africa. The perception of music there is quite different from the one in Europe. I felt a bit intimidated by the foresight if I would be able to bridge the gap. I think when it seemed like I did, by resonating with that different type of audience over there, I was immensely gratified. And obviously, I see myself more as a laboratory type of composer, in his own environment, no audiences, no nothing. And so for me, that was quite the opposite. I thought it also learned me some more about creating music, because the timeline of a given piece, a composition, people who do a lot of live work, they know more, it seems, than theoretical guys like myself about when an arch is broken or lasting too long for a live audience. So very experienced live players, they know more about that type of psychological technique of composing and arranging.
It strikes me as almost the difference between the architect and the engineer, or the architect and the carpenter.
Yeah.
Once you take those plans out into the world, you're constantly shaving off a piece here or making a manipulation there. Yeah. Fascinating.
It's very similar to that. Yeah.
As you said earlier, we're here to talk a bit about Asymmetrical Dot. You've put out there what the sort of arc is, or the narrative around the story, or the inspiration around the album.
Yeah.
I lost my mother over the last couple of years as well. And, I'm at the age where people around me are losing their parents if they haven't already. And it is a natural point for reflection. And how did the development of that arc come about? Did you say, I'm going to sit down and create a tribute to this person who, at the beginning of my life, exposed me to so much diversity, and now she's no longer with us, so I want to do a thing? Or, could you unpack the journey there to this?
Of course. I thought it wasn't only her passing away, it was accumulation of her passing away a couple of months later than when there was a new birth in our family, namely my grandson. My mother wasn't well already at the time with Alzheimer. My biggest wish instinctively was for the two of them to meet while still possible. And so it happened, only once and for only 1 hour. it was me being obviously part of the scene, but at the same time, I felt like this artistical observer type of person, where I witnessed the scene and I thought, boy, this is the zenith of human existential chain movement. That might be translatable to The Horse I Know music. That was my starting point with the whole venture.
Yeah.
I thought it was a good theme, trying to avoid overt sentimentality. From one came the other, whilst wanting not to evolve in that way. I suddenly decided then it should also not be the type of tribute you do in an emotional mood, where you have certain musical types which are known for representing that mood.
D minor.
Minor, but also a little soppy, with sweet tooth strings and full blast into that direction. So I thought what I should do is throw in the eclecticness, which I've learned from her, because she was a ballet teacher in her lifetime. As a boy, she exposed me to all kinds of music at an early age. I heard Dave Brubeck, whereas my peers at the time probably were doing children's songs. I heard Jimi Hendrix when nobody on the national radio still played it, and she used it for her dance teachings. So Coltrane, Stravinsky, Villa-Lobos, Santana, Haitian, voodoo percussion type of music. She used Indonesian music, where she is originally from. And so she was the real eclectic, not me. I only took it with me in my creational efforts.
What do you attribute her eclectic musical taste to? I mean, I think of Indonesia as being a place where it's such a crossroads because of trade and peoples that have come through, and there's a Yemeni influence, and it's an interesting place. But I don't know how that translates to the specific of the individual, and I'm wondering if you have a theory of that, or if you and she spoke about that.
Not really, but for me, it made sense with the knowledge I have developed about musical history. I thought the typical Indonesian cultural music, folk music in a way, is usually done with a couple of instruments known as the gamelan. Now, the gamelan, I'm certainly not the first, or probably not the last, to try and integrate that. Debussy did that when he was exposed to it in the 1.5 century ago now, I guess. And that's hearing how he did that. I thought, yeah, but I can try and see if I feel it more and not use it, adapt it as a stranger in the field, but actually how I learned its system of composition through the dance routines my mother did. And this is where I talked with her about, because dance rhythm is not similar to music rhythm, I learned. I never understood that she was with this stick or a cane thumping on the floor, which I thought was not in the beat. And I asked her as a young boy, why are you tapping sort of arrhythmically? And she said, no, it's a different interpretation of rhythm. And I said, but how come you do that and some of the other ballet teachers not? She said, well, that is because I think in the different rhythm of Indonesia, for example, and try to integrate it in jazz ballet. So all of that together was a sort of a huge jumble, where in my memory reservoir, I found an entrance to uncover that for this project, really.
It strikes me as, because you're Dutch, I feel comfortable being direct.
Absolutely.
It strikes me as incredible that you could not have wound up in any other field.
No.
Did you ever consider any other field?
No, not really. But also music was since I think when I was 11, 12, I wasn't aware of any musicality within myself at an early age. It was again her saying, what are you playing on the piano during a ballet teaching break? She had a grand piano in the classroom. And during that, I just started to tickle ivories there through improvisation. Then she came back from her coffee and she said, do you know what you're playing? And I said, no idea. I'm just, noodling. And she said, no, you're not. That is Bach. I said, what? Who's that? Bach, a classical composer from Germany. That's where it all started, actually, that I started considering music. Well, if she says so, maybe I could do something with it. And then I got addicted to the muse myself as full blast ever since. No, I couldn't have become a lawyer or anything else, I guess. You're right.
Yeah. It's fascinating that it was Bach that you were playing, because I wonder if there's a few things going on there for me. One is, did you hear the melody somewhere and you were, and it was in your brain?
Yeah, absolutely.
The other, there's the sort of metaphysical piece for that composer in terms of it's ingrained in Western musical DNA. Like that's, it's almost the first of the species of Western composer.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly there were composers before, but you can talk to people in so many different musical realms and spheres who will say, oh, the greatest is Bach.
Yeah.
Like that's fascinating.
That's still going. I think the first option is the most likely one because she used that type of music also for her teachings. And subliminally, I think I have captured it. What was new, though, was that I apparently could reproduce it without any technique. Weird. In retrospect, that's where I got my musical awareness from. Never stopped ever since. Whereas when I look around me now, most of my contemporaries, they are either disillusioned in music industry or they are tired and they want to play golf or tennis. Whereas I am still right on there and I'm working on 2-3 albums simultaneously at the moment.
And what do you attribute that to? What's the difference in you and them?
I see it with my children as well. It took them a long while to make up their mind what they wanted to do in life, say up until their mid-20s, whereas I always knew. So for me, it's hard to imagine that you don't have the focus laid out to you quite organically, which I'm grateful for, but I do realize others might not even have that at my age currently. And I see some of the people who did try, but they gave up halfway. Not that I consider myself a trooper, but I felt, as I said, it's the horse I know. I really would be a bad architect or a surgeon. It's too late to switch. I might as well specialize in what I already know and try to become better at it. My inner motive is probably more abstract than that. You don't stand up one morning and say to yourself, I am in possession of the holy fire. You don't say that in the mirror in the bathroom, but I now have to say it must be that.
Yeah.
It must be.
There was a person when I was much younger life and when I was a kid, he was one of those musicians that could pick up anything and get a workable sound out of it. You know, he could play guitar, piano, but you could hand him a saxophone or whatever, and he could figure it out. Often how I heard descriptions of Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones like that they could hand him anything and he could make a serviceable sound.
Yeah, yes.
You know, and after college, this guy went into production music and actually in commercials and doing jingles.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to him after not seeing him for a few years, like, what is this about? Like, it seems such a strange way to be applying what you can do. And he said, you know, there's only so many people that get to be pop stars or first call session musicians. But what am I going to not work in music? Like, I'm not going to go sell insurance.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
So I work in music. My life is music,
Yeah.
and this is just a different way to do it. And that always, you know, that was 30 some odd years ago. I had that conversation with him, and it strikes me as it was very illuminating for me.
Where is that person now?
He's still doing the same thing.
Right.
It's very workmanlike.
Yeah.
It's very work. Yeah. He doesn't even, as far as I know, doesn't even really play in bands or record music. I think he has a very like workmanlike relationship with music.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
There is one person in American classical music. It's not Harry Parch, the eccentric, but it's the one that had two lives. One as a
Ives?
Yeah, Charles Ives.
Ives.
Insurances.
Yeah.
You know, that word triggering. He was a top insurances agent, apparently.
It's hysterical.
Yeah. Well, but I do have colleagues who prefer that. My closest assistant for 20 years, named Lawrence, was somebody who said, I love music, I adore it, but I hate the music industry, so I'm going to quit. And I said, but what are you going to do next? He said, I'd rather become a truck driver. He's a school's professor of music, actually, and sonologist. And he is much happier now driving the truck and in the evening hours making his weird experimental music. And he says the pressure is off now for trying to make it with my experiments. I'm just making them, full stop.
Yeah, I relate to that. When I was a kid, I played in bands and all that stuff. And I was always very into like, let's go get gigs, let's go record.
Yeah.
And then, you know, as my 20s started to unfold, I realized I'm not very good and I don't have the real commitment, single-minded commitment to this.
Yeah.
You know, I always worked in music. The last group of people I played with, you know, we played very self-indulgent improvisational music. And it was the most fun I had because there were no stakes. We weren't trying to achieve anything. We just played.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wish I was like that.
You've done all right. When you take a record like Asymmetrical Dot and put it out into the world, you can have all of the intention and all of the narrative arc around it that you bring to it, but you can't really control how the listener receives it. No. Is it important to you that they understand the backstory or the context? It has to stand alone as music, obviously, as a listening experience. What's your relationship with that divorce between your entire concept and what you don't control about the listener's receipt of it?
I feel a rigid concept is just not communicable to the listener. So you have to allow freedom. I demand that from myself as a maker. So what I say today is if they can mirror themselves or identify with rather the gist of the matter, that's good enough for me. And the gist might be that they give it their own interpretation in their own human life they lead. And if they find a little angle or a little hook hidden in that musical proposal, then I think I've done well.
When you're scoring for film or television or, doing production work, I would think that to some extent, obviously there's the collaboration with other creatives, but there's something that functions as a brief or a prompt or direction, right? Like, you mentioned earlier, we need something that sounds like this or that conveys this. I'm sure you've spent hours in those discussions.
Hours and hours.
What replaces that when you're working on your autonomous music? You're the director and the executor and the implementer. And again, I kind of go back to my initial question. Is there anything from that commercial side of your life that was valuable in your more personal work that says, okay, I need a prompt or I need a direction? Where does it come from when it's just you?
With the first record I made, which was a spoken word set to music on an album called Recitement, with, amongst others, Lou Reed attending, and Visconti, he produced it in New York at the time. This is like 9 years ago. That was the fruit of my first effort to try and create autonomous music again, though at the time I was still creating production music. So my one fear was, because at that time I already did make an awful lot of production music, I was fearing that I would have, by that time, only have become craftsman as such and no longer have the inner inclination to express myself. So it was a terrifying moment for me to sit there next to my piano and then have no assignment to give me a head start. Indeed, the worst happened. Nothing came out of me, because when there's no assignment or no briefing or no prompt, then you could do everything. You could make improvised music, you'd make symphonic music, sound design, or bluegrass. Too many possibilities. So that's where I decided I'll become my own prompter. I didn't know what to do, and I thought, see, all your inner artistry is because of that craftsmanship within production music. What a terrible thing. And then suddenly I saw a old MC cassette on my studio desk, which had the voice of Richard Burton on there, with him reciting poetry, English poetry by Yeats.
Wow.
And I thought, what I'll do is I'll just play along and follow his voice, see what happens. That's my own personal assignment to myself. And I started doing that. And I suddenly heard, he is the Rolls Royce of voices, I have to say. He stops like Charlie Parker. His phrasing is like Sinatra. Start, stop, delay, anticipate on the rhythm. And all he did there, instead of dominating him with a staccato rhythm, I, as the instrumentalist, started following him with all his musical hidden subtleties in his voice-overing. And that's where I learned, this is my new personal assignment. Soundtrack human voices to emphasize how musical they in reality are. And that's how the whole new first autonomous album came about, by simply finding my own mission instead of improvising from total blankness.
So another powerful thing there that you refer to that comes up a lot in my conversations is the idea of artists needing constraint, because when you have too many options, it's very hard to get started or to execute. So if you eliminate possibility, that's not a diminishment, that's a focusing function.
Indeed, well put. And also, if I may add to that, the routine of creation is also where I learned the hard way that the poet waits for moonlight to inspire him, but the video editor pushes the start button. And I decided to become a hybrid of those two. You just start, don't wait for the moonlight. And it's like you almost exercise the inspiration muscle, because it will follow, it will obey when you just start, not wait for the moonlight. It's the difference between the writer and the poet.
Yeah, that's a fascinating concept.
Yeah.
When you're composing for Recitement in particular has these sort of, for lack of a better way to say it, iconic voices. You weren't just picking people off the street,
No.
You mentioned Bert and Lou Reed.
Yeah.
Ginsberg, right?
Yeah, Ginsberg is on there.
Like characters.
Yeah.
Characters.
Character voices. I learned, I asked my girlfriend to do one, and that was very sweet. As she is not a vocal artiste, I thought there's too less musicality in it. It's more straightforward reading. And like with method actors, they make you feel their character. And I think A good vocal artist makes you hear a real character. That's why I started selecting on character voices only. Yeah.
It's funny. I don't know if this is relevant in any way whatsoever, but as you were saying that, I was thinking about the times when I've seen iconic voice actors like Mel Blanc, like people who do famous cartoon characters, and you see them in person voicing the character's voice. It creates a very strange, almost somatic experience of hearing the voice coming out of a human as opposed to, Bugs Bunny.
Yeah, of course, of course. You're right in that. And one of the most wonderful voices I thought on that Recitement album was the voice of the late Ken Nordine.
Yeah, Ken Nordine's got a great voice.
That's a great voice. He was also in that situation where he had to do the vocal artistry for the money to create commercials about the amount of colors of paint for a paint company in the 50s. And that's where he made his Colors album, sponsored by the paint company. One of these tracks, I borrowed his a cappella version of The Color Gray. I had the chance of talking to him about this, and he said, beware, if you use the same title, there will be confusion, Stephen. I said, so you want me to give it a different title, the Gray Performance? He said, why not Absolutely Gray? And that's how the title came about.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Are there voices you would have liked to have included? I would love to see what you do at William Burroughs. I find his voice so rhythmic anyway. But are there voices you would love to set to music?
Orson Welles.
That's another great one. That's a great one. The entire personality of Orson Welles comes through his voice.
Indeed. So that would have been great. I tried to do one other favorite of mine, which is the great Ernest Hemingway himself.
Oh, wow.
And it was supposed to come on the album, except that Hemingway estate, in which his daughters are the one remaining daughter is involved, she gave the blessing of the family. However, the publisher said no, so we couldn't do it.
Oh, that's fascinating. Why, he was reading one of his works?
Yeah, fantastic. That was really good. But how about Laurence Olivier, the British actor? But not too many are around, I have to say. I think I was very lucky in the selection that went through.
With a record like Asymmetrical Dot, Given how personal the subject matter is, or the inspiring subject matter
Mm,
is,
mm.
do you feel a vulnerability around that? Like, what's your emotional girding around that?
Yeah, it's vulnerable. For example, the grandson, I also pay tribute to musically. His family, being my daughter and her husband, they are a bit cautious about that I would use pictures to show with pride him on the socials, and so I respect that, and I won't do that. But this, I think that we're in fact now talking about him in the podcast. Yeah, I think I'm permitted to do. It sounds a bit blasé, but I'm kind of used to doing that. It's not very nice that some of the reactions are not so very cool.
Yeah.
There's always haters, especially in the modern times, online. Why are you talking about your mother? She was a bad woman. What? Was she? And all of that. That's a modernity I wish wouldn't be there. It's without reason or logic, empathy, you name it. That's the only thing which is a bit of a backdrop, but I can manage that because it's very rare.
Yeah, the thing that worries me about that is not for, as individuals, some of us can handle that and some of us can't. That's a personal resilience
Yeah.
issue. But
Yeah.
what troubles me is the artist who can't handle that
Yeah.
and stops creating. That to
Yeah.
me is the
Yeah.
disaster.
And I believe the guy on the truck I mentioned earlier also meant this, not only his angry clients or mine or ours, but also means they don't feel comfortable exposing themselves publicly. They'd rather stay somewhere, backstage. That's where they find fertile ground for their type of artistry.
Mm.
I'm not like that. I'm no extrovert either, because on the stage, I think I'm just one of the boring kind of stage persons, head down, looking at his instrument, nothing going on but the rent. Very boring. However, it's been asked because of the current album, Asymmetrical Dot. I was invited for doing live performances of it as well, which is now something I haven't done for 20 years. I'm currently considering and have a talk about it with a few musicians because I want it to be a very special type of performance of the work of Asymmetrical Dot, but also rearranged versions, transcribed versions of the previous album called Mount Mundane. And the one before that, the Maison Melody. I consider that to be my introspective trilogy. Bit pretentious, but with these three, I think I can make a very nice selection of intimate music.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Sure.
When you told me earlier about that hour that you spent and that your mother and your grandson had together and how you quickly came to see it through the lens of an artist, did you still feel you were able to be present as a son and grandfather?
Yeah. This is where we all have to find mindful courses, have to follow mindfulness courses. Being in the moment
Yeah.
when you have the tendency also to take the helicopter view, the bird view, at the same time, obviously lessens the focus in one or the other department, depending where you focus on. So I do think that I'd rather would have been there as a son and not as a composer.
Yeah. I've had similar experiences where I've struggled to have both experiences or both points of view
Yeah.
and not wanted to give up one of them
Uh-huh.
in the moment. It felt important to have it always.
Unfortunately, I also had to obey the inspiration.
How, if at all, has hearing loss changed your relationship with sound or how you think about sound?
Quite drastically, because when it became too much, I mean, the whole thing started, in short, with me being in a support group during a live performance of at the time still called heavy metal group called Motorhead. And with Motorhead, they found the joy in our melodical soft music, our band was. So the crew of
God.
Motorhead, I mean, we never got to see the big artist, but the crew of Motorhead, at that time being labeled the loudest band in the world, they thought to play a little joke on me. I was playing keyboard. in a soft melodic ensemble. They said, yeah, give it a try. And there was no sound coming from the electronic piano. Not, wink, wink. Try once more time, which I did. And then bang, I had this huge blast in my left ear. I didn't, at the same night, I could still perform, didn't feel anything, apart from feeling awkward, sort of blasted. But no pain, no hearing loss, no sound, no tinnitus. But it slept in my head. And this is where I want to warn people for. It doesn't always present itself overnight. So people think, oh, I have to be careful. See, I'm okay the next weekend to go off to see another performance again. Whereas with me, it slept for almost 20 years, and then suddenly it got triggered by something minimal. And that's where my problems started. They got worse because after the tinnitus, it became hearing loss in my left ear. Ultimately, not so long ago, I suffered dizzy spells, vertigo. So that is all connected with each other in our heads, where the balancing organ is very close to the inner ear. And so with all of that, I felt quite incapacitated to do basically anything. So certainly not music making. So I stopped that for a couple of years, except that I found out that I could do it on a lower volume and use different instruments. Kick out everything with a noise-making character, like an electric guitar, drums, piercing synthesizers, loud brass, you name it. I thought that's going to be a bit boring. But the wonderful thing was, Lawrence, that it brought me onto a new way of creating things where out of the limitation of not being able to use anything you have in mind, no more Wagner, no more loud bebop saxophone snarls, all of that out. Out of that necessity, out of that limitation, grew my interest in more milder type of instruments, woodwinds, soft strings, felt piano, the hushed piano, cups on trumpets to get a more velvety sound. As that was a part of my musical expertise, not really well developed, by the sheer limitation of things, acoustical shortcomings, I learned a whole new way of composing, arranging, and producing through this. And therefore now the trilogy I mentioned of my last 3 albums is without pulse. So no beat bashing, no harsh instruments. It's only mild, it's slow tempo, it's sort of atmospheric, and that is just about all I can take, actually, as a listener.
So it's back to the constraints, though, that idea of the constraints, though, rather than let the constraint be, the constraint is the possibility.
Yeah. That's trying to create beauty out of misery.
Yeah. Stephen, thank you.
Wonderful conversation. I'd like to thank you for that very much.
Thank you so much, Stephen Emmer, and thank you for tuning into the Tonearm. If you enjoyed this conversation, check out the more than 300 episodes available in our free archive at thetonearm.com. While you're there, join our mailing list or consider becoming a paid supporter. The Tonearm is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Peryer. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson. Editing and sound design is by Terry Grant, and our theme music is by Birdie, spelled B-U-R-D-Y. Thank you for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.
After listening to this episode, head to thetonearm.com, our online journal covering unexpected music and culture. Right now on the Tonearm, you'll find features on Sonic Youth guitarist Thurston Moore, author and krautrock survivor Wolfgang Seidel, insect-loving sound artist Lisa Ann Schoenberg, magic summoning violinist Meredith Bates, and so much more. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter, Talk of the Tonearm. That's thetonearm.com. The Tonearm, putting a needle on the cultural wax.